I use various websites like Craigslist for the same reasons everyone else does. You can find expensive items at significantly discounted prices, or even just cheap things for even cheaper. I don't have a ton of money, and using these sites is sometimes essential when it comes to getting things like furniture that's usually really expensive to buy anywhere else. This happened when I was looking around for a dining room table. Ours was really old, and my whole family used it as a place to eat and as a workspace, so it's been through a lot over the years. I went around on Facebook Marketplace and OfferUp, but neither had anything good. Most of them were still expensive, and even when I tried to bargain with a few of the sellers, none of them would budge. So then I went to Craigslist. Around here, I think most people use other sites nowadays, but Craigslist still always had the cheapest deals, though they were still somewhat rare to find. But almost as soon as I opened up the site and hit enter on the search bar, a really good listing showed up. It was a very basic wooden dining table that didn't have much wear on it, and the seller posted it for only $100. Compared to the $400, $500 everyone else was listing things for, this was a steal. I sent a message saying I'd love to check it out and would be willing to pay the full price. He didn't reply immediately, so I just took a break and hung out with my kids until around 7 when they went to their rooms to get ready for bed. I went back to my laptop and found a response from just a couple minutes ago. It was a very quick few sentences saying he was sorry but the table was going to be thrown out tomorrow morning, but if I really wanted it, I'd have to come by tonight or any time before 5 a.m. tomorrow. It was weird that he'd be willing to sell it at any time during the night, and his reasoning didn't make all that much sense to me. But after some thought, I replied back saying I could pick it up right now. I didn't want to go there really late into the night or super early in the morning, but it was only 7, so I didn't see a problem if I was able to go right now. The man replied quickly, agreeing and sending the address. It was only 10 minutes from my place. So I let my wife know what was going on and where I'd be, then headed out. From context clues, you probably already know that I don't live in a lavish area, so when I say the seller's house was really worn down, I mean it was really worn down. It was small like the others in our area, but the yard was full of trash and random other things, was surrounded by a thin chain link fence. I parked on the side and opened the fence, walking through the yard and up to the door, which was already open. I could hear some people talking and laughing. I peeked inside and gave a light knock on the door. Right away, a man came around the corner and invited me in. He looked like he was in late college, somewhere in his mid-20s. As I stepped inside, though, I couldn't help but notice how disgusting the whole place was. There were beer cans laying around and stains in the carpet. It looked like a really poorly taken care of house where they had probably hosted hundreds of college parties. The man was very laid back, though, casually walking me down the hallway and into the kitchen while talking about how he didn't have room for the table anymore. When we got to the kitchen, there were 2 other men, looking about the same age and standing against the wall, seemingly in the middle of a conversation. Next to them was the table. Somehow it looked almost untouched. I didn't know how that was possible considering the rest of the house. I walked around it and checked to see if it was stable and whatnot, but as I did, the house suddenly went quiet. The 2 talking had stopped and the man selling the table didn't speak either. I looked up, seeing them all staring at me. Did I do something? I asked, looking around at each of them. When my eyes fell on one of the men closest to me, though, I noticed that his pupils were massive, something that only being drugged up could achieve, but what he was on I didn't know. Regardless, in that moment, I knew this wasn't right. Not only was this getting strange, but I didn't want to buy a table that's been in this kind of house and used by these sorts of people. I think I'm going to pass on it. Thank you, though, I said softly. I started walking toward the hallway, but one of them stepped in front of me. He didn't say anything, he just stood there, blocking the way out. Something about the way they were all looking and acting. I could tell that whatever this was planned out, and they likely never meant to sell the table. My face fell to fear, as the anticipation of just standing there, surrounded by these strangers, began to overwhelm me. But then one of them stepped over and whispered something in the other's ear, and they moved aside, still not saying anything. I cautiously walked between them, hurrying down the hallway and out the door. A lot of things went through my head on the drive home. I knew that they were planning something horrible, but what that was and why they ended up letting me go, I'm not so sure of. When I got home, I told my wife, who convinced me to call the police and report it, but they couldn't do anything without anything having happened. So whatever those men were planning, I'll probably never know. I just hope someone else doesn't have to find out. I wanted to move out of my old apartment in a few months and was hoping to get some money to help pay for movers. The shoes were nothing special, but I listed them for generous prices, hoping to get them bought quickly. It was some guy whose email had the name John K. in it, and he offered just $5 less than my listing price. It seemed like an unnecessary adjustment to the original price, but I didn't want to keep waiting for more offers, so I wrote him back saying I was okay with that. We set up to meet the following day at 5 in the parking lot of a public gas station in the middle of town. The next day I sent a text and he confirmed that he was on his way, so I left as well and got to the gas station right at 5. They weren't there yet, but there was a lot of traffic on the road, so I figured he'd be late. I sat in my car patiently, and over the course of 30 minutes, the roads cleared up and the sun started coming down, and then John finally pulled in. He drove a small sedan with none of the headlights working and resembling something from a scrapyard. He parked next to me and got out. John looked like he was in his 30s and was a pretty large guy, wearing ripped-up clothes and having long, unkempt hair. He didn't say much, so I brought out the shoes and let him look at them. As he held them, though, and didn't say anything, he kept looking back at the gas station. I don't know what he was looking at, I thought, but after he checked over his shoulder multiple times, I glanced over as well. The gas station was empty aside from one guy putting gas in his car, but otherwise I didn't know what he could be looking at. John was taking his time, though, pointlessly looking over everything multiple times, as if they were some really rare shoes that he was going to drop hundreds on. But these were just some regular sneakers, nothing fancy or rare. Then John looked over his shoulder one more time, just as the car by the pump started to drive away, and all of a sudden, his whole demeanor changed. He stopped looking at the shoes and looked at me. "What else do you have?" he asked abruptly. I looked at him confused. "Those are the only shoes I brought. I didn't know you were interested in others." His eyes went cold as he stepped past me and put his hand on my car door, trying to open it. "It was locked," I explained. John immediately looked at me and told me to unlock it. His voice was deep and strict, like it was a threat if I didn't. I kind of just stared at him and tried to wrap my head around this, thinking of what the best course of action would be, but in the moment, there's just no time to really think through options. I unlocked the door, knowing at most all he could take was a couple random bills I had in the front, but then he said something that I was not expecting at all. "Get in." He opened the passenger door and told me again. I stood there, even more taken aback, but now starting to get way more worried about where this was going. I looked behind me, hoping someone else was here, but the gas station was empty. No people or cars anywhere in sight. John grabbed my arm and pulled me over to the door, taking the keys from me and aggressively shoving me into the car while throwing a few punches landing on the right side of my face. I immediately tried to get up, but John slammed the door against my head, making my vision go blurry and everything just sort of fading in and out. I heard him start walking around the car as if he was going to the driver's side, but then he suddenly turned around and sprinted back to his truck. I was still out of it and barely remember anything else, but I guess someone pulled in at the perfect time and confronted John, scaring him away. If they hadn't have helped me and John was able to get in and presumably drive away, I don't know what would have happened. Assuming his car was either stolen or untraceable to his name, then stealing my car and abducting me would have left no trace of our interaction, giving him days, if not weeks, to do whatever it was he planned before anyone would even come looking. I stumbled upon a Craigslist ad for a beautiful antique piano at an unbeatable price. And these types of pianos can be unbelievably expensive if the seller knows its true value. I emailed the seller and he quickly replied. He seemed friendly and said he was excited to meet me and show me the piano. The address he gave me was a bit off the beaten path out in a rural area outside of town, but I didn't think anything of it. Thursday evening, right on schedule, I hopped in my car and started the drive out there. It was already dark and the winding roads were getting more and more questionable as I went along. I was quickly becoming unnerved. When I finally reached the address that he had given me, it looked like an old church. I guess I just didn't know the difference between an old farmhouse and an old church, though. They all kind of looked the same in my mind, so I thought that's what it was. I saw the man walking out of the front door waving at me and calling my name. Hesitantly, I got out of my car and began to make my way over to him. He was tall and thin with dull beady eyes and a quirky smile. He seemed friendly, but there was something off about him. "Welcome," he said. I hoped the drive wasn't too bad. I nodded, trying to compose myself and push aside the uneasy feelings. He led me inside the place, which I immediately noticed that it likely was actually an old church, but it had been converted into some sort of makeshift musical instrument museum. There was all kinds of gear lining the walls: drums, banjos, guitars, and a host of other instruments. I didn't spot the piano, though. I turned and asked him where the piano was. "It's downstairs," he replied. I hesitated, something not feeling right with the way he said it. Nonetheless, I followed him down a narrow hallway where a staircase led down below. He grabbed a heavy flashlight before starting down those stairs. As we reached the bottom, he turned to me and gave me a lopsided grin. "It's down here. Don't worry." He shined the flashlight on a small room off to the side. I hesitated, unsure if I should go in, but I was too far in to back out now. We entered the room. The man flicked the lights on, which were dim, just enough to see the piano sitting in the center. The problem was, it looks nothing like the picture in the ad. The wood was chipping, keys were missing from one end of the keyboard, and it was quite a bit smaller than I anticipated. "It's not quite what I was expecting it," I said, trying to sound polite, but my disappointment was clear in my voice. "I'm sorry, it's not quite what you were looking for," he replied. He crossed his arms and leaned against the wall, watching my every move. I felt like a trapped animal, self-aware and panicky. The whole setup was weird, and I felt like I needed to leave. "Thanks for this, I think I'll pass on it though," I said. I looked over at the man, who was still leaning against the wall with a crooked smile on his face. "Is there anything else you'd like to look at?" "Yes." "No, I'm okay," I stuttered, feeling threatened by his tone. "I think that's all for today." I quickly rushed out of the room, and during the dark, unlit hallway, I managed to find the stairs and quickly made my way up, leaving out the front door. Even though I had managed to escape, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more sinister going on. Maybe it was the way John had looked at me, or the way he acted, or just the tone in his voice. When I got home, I opened my laptop and looked up the address. Online, it showed a picture of the old church. It was labeled as a historical music museum, opened only on the weekends for viewings. I looked into it further and didn't find any information about them selling anything. My body shook and I closed my laptop. I'd likely escaped something awful. I was already skeptical with sites like Craigslist, but after that I was done. I haven't used Craigslist or even Facebook Marketplace after that night. Because really, when you think about it, you're taking a gamble on your life over some used items. Don't use Craigslist. And if you do, never let your guard down. Having just moved to a new city, I turned to Craigslist to find someone to share my new apartment with. As soon as I saw his post, I contacted him. His name was James. We exchanged a few emails and phone calls, and things seemed to be going well. A few days later, we agreed to meet in person to discuss the details. At first, James seemed like a friendly and easygoing guy. He was in his early 30s and kind of reminded me of myself. We talked for a while about our interests and hobbies, and he shared some funny stories about his previous roommates. As we were wrapping up our conversation, James suddenly got very serious. "There's something I have to tell you. It's kind of important," he said, and I looked at him confused. "What condition?" "Sleepwalking," he said, "and it's pretty severe. I just want you to know that up front in case there was a problem." I shrugged and said it was fine. Not a big deal. The first few weeks went by without incident. James seemed like a great roommate, and we got along well. But then I started noticing strange things around the apartment in the morning. Food would be missing from the fridge and things would be moved around. I assumed it was just James sleepwalking, but didn't give it much thought. One night I was awakened by strange noises coming from James's room. At first it sounded like he was talking to himself, but then I realized it was something else. A low growling sound that sent chills down my spine. I got up quietly, crept to his door, and listened. The growling got louder and more intense. I opened the door slowly, and as I peered inside, I saw James standing in the middle of the room, his eyes closed. It was a strange and unsettling sight. I felt like I was seeing something that I wasn't supposed to see and chose to back away, go back to my room. The sounds went on for a few more minutes before they stopped. In the morning, I refrained from mentioning anything to James so as to not embarrass him. He seemed to be acting normal anyway, so I brushed it all under the rug and forgot about it. Another few days went by, and I found myself waking up occasionally to footsteps in the hallways or doors opening and closing, and sometimes even James making that same growling type noise. I knew it was just James sleepwalking, so it didn't frighten me, but I still had trouble falling asleep unless I heard him go back to bed. One night, though, I woke up to James's bedroom door closing. Usually he closed the door softly, but this time it sounded like he had slammed it. My eyes shot open and I stared at my door as his footsteps slowly crept over and stopped. I could see his shadow underneath the crack in the door. Then the doorknob slowly turned and he opened the door softly. James's figure stood in the darkness between the doorway. I was frozen, staring at the creepy roommates. I knew it was him sleepwalking, but it was still a creepy sight. Then he began making those same growling noises. After a moment, he stopped. A second later, his eyes shot open, and suddenly he lunged towards me. But in seconds, he had me pinned it down. His eyes were blank and expressionless. "Stay still," he said in a monotone voice, as if he was still asleep. "Don't move." I tried to break free, but he was too strong. I felt a deep, intense fear building inside me. And then just like that, it was over. James released me and slumped off the bed. Then lethargically walked back to his room, closing his door softly behind him. I quickly got up and locked my bedroom door, then stayed up for the rest of the night. In the morning, I left for work early before James even got up. I dreaded the thought of seeing him at home after work, because I knew I wouldn't make things awkward. But when I pulled into the driveway, his car wasn't there. I then noticed a lot of things missing from the house, and when I checked his room, it had been emptied. I tried calling James over the next few days, but never got a response. I never heard from him ever again. I have no idea why he left. Maybe he somehow knew what he did and felt ashamed, but if he was truly sleepwalking, then he wouldn't have had any memory of it. It still freaks me out. And my mind associates the encounter with Craigslist, so I stopped using the site. I just hope James really was sleepwalking, because I'm worried that if he wasn't, then he might come back.